Hello, hello. All right, now to see if you can hear me over it, hopefully. I realized that I had it down too far on the page and then too far down on OBS to be heard. So in my trying to not overpower anybody else, I think I overdid it. And it was too quiet. I wanted to give it a minute to see if people came in before I unveil the new thing. Good. I'm glad that I'm over it. That reminds me though, I do need to let Bear know that I am going. Because he wanted to be able to come in to stream. Well, I would love to take this time. No worries. I would like to take this time to unveil my brand new image. And now I transform. Ta-da! I have my new face. I officially have the whole new face. Yeah, so this is me. But because we are doing reading today, this is going to be me today. So for reading streams, this is what we've got. And I'm quite excited. Ta-da! So, yeah. I'll give it another 2 minutes for people to kind of come in, settle in, grab a tea, get cozy, and we will jump into the continuation.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal. Send me a kiss, my wife. Baby, my heart's on fire.
Yes. But I'm going to give it a few minutes so people can get in, get comfy, get a tea. I'm going to get a drink. It did work. I figured it out. I spent hours figuring it. I ended up resetting a lot of stuff, if I'm not entirely mistaken. But it was worth it. Yes, I say I smile. I needed my sippies before I start doing the reading. Sippy sippy. I did my sippy sippy. I did all of my sippy sippies. Hi, Bear. I think I'll have to change. Yep. Yep. Oi! I am probably gonna have to change it so that your intro thingy is for Cloud and not just for Bear. So that way when people say your name, it'll ping for you too. Okay. Sounds good. Thank you for coming in and supporting me, husband human. And just because I want you to make sure that... Because it's important that people know that you ended up here too. And I don't know if you'd actually heard that one yet. Okay, so to kind of recap what happened before we went through some of the early life. It's okay. It was just said, not the beard. It's okay. Thank you. Love you. Go back to work now. And okay on the BRB. No worries, Garo. Take your time. I know that you can hear me anyways. But to basically recap for others, we started out the book and we went through most of the very early life of Moll Flanders, and we got to her young teenagehood, and that's where we're at right now. And I will be picking up from where I left off on page 32, because this is a book that does not have chapters, so we just kind of go. Thank you for the follow. That's okay, Pilcrow. Thank you. How you know?
You can be a big pig too.
Oi! Alright. Well, I am gonna get started on the reading. And everybody just settle in, get comfy, and I hope you enjoy. He'd pacified me as long as he could with this, but I found he was very thoughtful, and that though he was very kind to me, he'd kiss me 1,000 times and more. I believed and gave me more money, too, yet he'd offered me no more all the while we were together, which was above 2 hours, and which I much wondered at, considering how it used to be, and what opportunities we had. His brother did not come from London for 5 or 6 days, and it was 2 days more before he got an opportunity to talk with him, but then, getting him by himself, he'd talked very close to him about it, and the same evening found means, for we had a long conference together, to repeat all of their discourse to me, which, as near as I could remember, was to the purpose following. He told me he heard strange news of him since he went, that he made love to Mrs. Betty. Well, says his brother a little angrily, and what then? What has anybody to do with that? Nay, says his brother, don't be angry, Robin. I don't pretend to have anything to do with it, but I find they do concern themselves about it, and that they have used the poor girl ill about it, which I should take as done to myself. Who do you mean by they? Said Robin. I mean my mother and the girls, says the elder brother. But hark ye, says his brother, are you in earnest? Do you really love the girl? Why then, says Robin, I will be free with you. I do love her above all other women in the world, and I will have her. Let them say and do what they will. I believe the girl will not deny me. It struck me to the heart when he told me this, for though it was most rational to think I would not deny him, yet I knew in my own conscience I must, and I saw my ruin in my being obliged to do so, but I knew it was my business to talk otherwise then. So I interrupted him in his story. "Ay," said I, "does he think I cannot deny him? But he shall find I can deny him for all that." "Well, my dear," says he, "but let me give you the whole story as it went on between us, and then say what you will." Then he went on and told me that he replied thusly: "But, brother, you know she has nothing, and you may have several ladies with good fortune. 'Tis no matter for that," said Robin. "I love the girl, and will never please my pocket in marrying, and not please my fancy. And so, my dear," adds he, "there is no opposing him." "Yes, yes," says I can oppose him. I have learnt to say no now, though I had not learnt it before. But if the best lord in the land offered me marriage now, I could very cheerfully say no to him." "Well, but, my dear," says he, "what can you say to him? You know, as you said before, he will ask you many questions about it, and all the house will wonder what the meaning of it should be." "Why," says I, smiling, "I can stop all their mouths at once, one clap, by telling him and them too that I am married already to his elder brother." His smile a little too at the word, but I could see it startled him, and he could not hide the disorder it put him into. "However," he returned, "why, though that may be true in some sense, yet I suppose you are in but jest. When you talk of giving such an answer as that, it may not be convenient on many accounts." "No, no," says I pleasantly, "I am not so fond of letting that secret come out without your consent." "But what then can you say to them," say he, "when they find you positively against the match, which would be apparently so much to your advantage?" "Why," says I, "should I be at a loss? First, I am not obliged to give them any reason. On the other hand, I may tell them I am married already and stop there, and that will be a full stop to him too, for he can have no reason to ask one question after it." "Ay," says he, "but the whole house will tease you about that, and if you deny them positively, they will be disobliged at you and suspicious besides." "Why," says I, what can I do? "What would you have me do? I was in such straits enough before, as I told you, and acquainted with you the circumstances that I might have your advice." "My dear," says he, "I have been considering very much upon it, and you may be sure, and though the advice has many mortifications to me in it, and may at first seem strange to you, yet all things considered, I see no better way for you than to let him go on, and if you find him hearty and in earnest, marry him." I give him a look full of horror at these words, and turning pale as death, was at the very point of sinking down out of the chair I sat in, when giving a start, "My dear," says he aloud, "what's the matter with you? Where are you going?" and a great many such things, and with jogging and calling to me, fetched me a little to myself, though it was a good while before I fully recovered my senses, and was not able to speak for several minutes. When I fully recovered, he began again. "My dear," says he, "I would have you consider seriously of it. It may see plainly how the family stands in this case, and they would be stark mad if it was my case, as it is for my brother. And for aught I see, it would be my ruin and yours too." "Ay," says I, still speaking angrily, "are all your protestations and vows to be shaken by the dislike of the family? Did I not always object that to you, and you made light of things of it, as what you were above, and would not value, and is it come to this now? Is this your faith and honor, your love, and the solidarity of your promises?" He continued perfectly calm, notwithstanding all my reproaches, and I was not sparing of them at all. But he replied at last, "My dear, I have not broken one promise with you yet. I did tell you I would marry you when I was come to my estate. But you see my father is a hale, healthy man, and may live these 30 years still, and not be older than several are around us in the town. And you'd never proposed my marrying you sooner, because you knew it might be my ruin. And as to the rest, I have not failed you in anything." I could not deny a word of this. "But why then," says I, can you persuade me to do such a horrid step as leaving you, since you have not left me? Will you allow no affection, no love on my side, where there has been so much on your side? Have I made you no returns? Have I given no testimony of my sincerity and of my passion? Are the sacrifices I have made of honor and modesty to you no proof of my being tied to you in bonds too strong to be broken? But here, my dear," says he, "you may come into a safe sanction and appear with honor, and the remembrance of what we have done may be wrapped up in an eternal silence, as if it had never happened. You shall always have my sincere affection, only then it shall be honest and perfectly just to my brother. You shall be my dear sister, as now you are my dear." And there he'd stopped. "Your dear whore," says I. "You would have said, and you might as well have said it, but I understood you. However, I desire to remember the long discourse you have had with me, and the many hours' pain you have taken to persuade me to believe myself an honest woman, that I was your wife intentionally, and that it was an ineffectual as marriage that had passed between us, as if it had been publicly wedded to the person of the parish. You know these have been your own words to me." I found this was a little too close upon him, but I made it up in what follows. He stood stock still for a while, and said nothing, and went on thus: "You cannot," says I, "without the highest injustice believe that I yielded upon all these persuasions without a love not to be questioned, not to be shaken again by anything that could happen afterwards. If you have such dishonorable thoughts of me, I must ask you what foundation I have given for such a suggestion. If then I have yielded to the inopportunities of my affection, and if I have been persuaded to believe that I am really your wife, shall I now be given to lie to all of those arguments, and call myself your whore or mistress, which is the same thing? And will you then transfer me to your brother? Can you transfer my affection? Can you bid me cease loving you, and bid me to love him instead? Is it in my power, think you, to make such a change at demand? No, sir, said I. Depend upon it, 'tis impossible, and whatever the change on your side may be, I will ever be true. And I had much rather, since it is to come to that unhappy length, be your whore than your brother's wife." I quite aim this. Thank you for the follow. Now I just lost my spot. Oh, yes. Since it has come to that unhappy length, be your whore than your brother's wife. He appeared pleased and touched with the impression of this last discourse, and told me that he stood where he did before, that he had not yet been unfaithful to me in any one promise he had ever made yet, but that there were so many terrible things presented themselves to his view in the affair before me, that he had thought of the others as a remedy, only that he thought this would not be an entire parting us, but we might love as friends all our days, and perhaps with more satisfaction than we should in the station we were in now. That he dares say I could not apprehend anything from him as to betray a secret, which could not but be the destruction of us both if it came out. That he had but one question to ask of me, that could lie in the way of it, and if that question was answered, he could not but think still it was the only step I could take. I guessed at his question presently, whether I was not with child. As to that, I told him he need not be concerned about it, for I was not with child. Why then, my dear, says he, we have no time to talk further now. Consider of it. I cannot be of the opinion still that it will be of the best course you can take. And with this he took his leave, and the more hastily too, his mother and sisters ringing at the gate, just the moment that he had risen up to go. He left me in the utmost confusion of thoughts, and he easily perceived it the next day and all of the rest of the week. But he had no opportunity to come to me at all that week, till the Sunday after, when I, being indisposed, did not go to church, and he, making some excuses, stayed at home. Excuse me. And now he had me an hour and a half again by myself, and we fell into the same arguments all over again. At last I asked him warmly what opinion he must have of my modesty, that he could suppose I should so much as entertain a thought of lying with two brothers, and assured him it could never be. I added, if he was to tell me that he would never see me more, than which nothing but death could be more terrible, yet I could never entertain a thought of dishonorable to myself, and so base to him, and therefore I entreated him, if he had one grain of respect or affection left for me, that he would speak no more of it to me, and that he would pull his sword out and kill me. He appeared surprised at my obstinacy, as he'd called it, told me I was unkind to myself and unkind to him in it, that it was a crisis unlooked for upon for us both, but that he did not see any other way to save us both from ruin, and therefore he thought it the more unkind, but that if he must say no more of it to me, he added with an unusual coldness that he did not know anything else we had to talk of, and so he rose up to take his leave. I rose up too, as if with the same indifference, but when he came to give me, as it were, a parting kiss, I burst into such a passion of crying that though I would have spoken, I could not, and only pressing his hands, seemed to give him the adieu, but cried vehemently. He was sensibly moved with this, so he sat down again, and said a great many kind things to me, and still urged the necessity of what he had proposed, all the while insisting that if I did refuse, he would notwithstanding provide for me, but letting me plainly see that he would decline me in the main point, nay, even as a mistress, making it a point of honor not to lie with the women that, for aught he knew, might one day, one time or another, come to be his brother's wife. The bare loss of him as a gallant was not so much my affection as the loss of his person, whom indeed I'd loved to distraction, and the loss of all the expectations I'd had, and which I'd always built my hopes upon, of having him one day for my husband. These things oppressed my mind so much that, in short, the agonies of my mind threw me into a high fever, and long it was that none in the family expected my life. I was reduced very low indeed, and was often delirious, but nothing lay so near me as the fear that, when I was light-headed, I would say something or other to his prejudice. I was distressed in my mind also to see him, and so he was to see me, for he really loved me most passionately, but it could not be. There was not the least room to desire it on the one side or other. It was near 5 weeks that I kept my bed, and though the violence of my fever abated in 3 weeks, yet it several times returned. And the physicians said 2 or 3 times they could do no more for me, but that they must leave nature and the distemper to find it out. After the end of 5 weeks I grew better, but was so weak, so altered, and recovered so slowly that the physicians apprehended I should go into a consumption, and which vexed me most, they gave their opinion that my mind was oppressed, that something troubled me, and in short, that I was in love. Upon this, the whole house set upon me to press me to tell whether I was in love or not, and with who. But as I well might, I denied my being in love at all. They had on this occasion a squabble one day about me at the table that had like to put the whole family in an uproar. They happened to be all at the table but the father. As for me, I was ill and in my chamber. At the beginning of the talk, the old gentlewoman who had sent me somewhat to eat bid her maid go up and ask me if I would have any more, but the maid brought down word that I had not eaten half of what she had sent already. Alas, said the old woman, that poor girl, I am afraid she will never be well. Well, says the older brother, how should Mrs. Betty be well? They say she is in love. I believe nothing of it, says the old gentlewoman. I don't know, says the eldest sister, what to say to it. They have made such a rout about her being so handsome and so charming, and I know not what, and that in her hearing too, that had turned the creature's head, I believe, and who knows what possessions may follow such doings. For my part, I don't know what to make of it. Why, sister, you must acknowledge she is very handsome, says the eldest brother. Aye, and a great deal handsomer than you, sister, says Robin, and that's your mortification. Well, well, that is not the question, says his sister. The girl is well enough, and she knows it. She need not be told of it to make her vain. We don't talk of her being vain, says the elder brother, but of her being in love. Maybe she is in love with herself. It seems my sister thinks so. I would she was in love with me, says Robin. I'd quickly put her out of her pain. What do you mean by that, son? Says the old lady. How can you talk so? Why, madam, says Robin again very honestly, do you think I'd let the poor girl die for love, and of me too, that is so near at hand to be had? Fair brother, says the second sister, how can you talk so? Would you take a creature that has not a grout in the world? Prithee, child, says Robin, beauty's a portion, and good humour with it is a double portion. I wish thou had half her stock of both for thy portion. So there was her mouth stopped. I find, says the eldest sister, if Betty is not in love, my brother is. I wonder he has not broken his mind to Betty. I warrant she won't say no. They that yield when they are asked, says Robin, are one step before them that were never asked to yield, and 2 steps before them that yield before they are asked. And that's an answer to you, sister. This fired the sister, and she flew into a passion, and said things which were come to that pass, that it was time the wench, meaning me, was out of the family, and but that she would not fit to be turned out, she'd hoped her father and mother would consider it as soon as she could be removed. Robin replied, was for the master and mistress of the family, who were not to be taught by one that had so little judgment as his elder sister. It run up a great deal farther, the sister scolded. Robin rallied and bantered, but poor Betty lost ground by it extremely in the family. I heard of it and cried heartily, and the old lady came up to me, somebody having told her that I was so much concerned about it. I complained to her that it was very hard the doctors should pass such a censure upon me, for which they had no ground, and that it was still harder considering the circumstances I was under in the family, that I hoped I had done nothing to lessen her esteem of me, or given any occasion for the bickering between her sons and daughters, and I had more need to think of a coffin than of being in love, and begged she would not let me suffer in her opinion for anybody's mistake but my own. Thank you, Cloud. I should be good. She was sensible of the justice of what I said, but told me since there had been such a clamor among them, and that her younger son talked after such a rattling way as he did, she desired I would be so faithful to her as to answer her but one question sincerely. I told her I would, and with the utmost plainness and sincerity. Why then the question was whether there was anything between her son Robert and me. I told her with all protestations of sincerity that I was able to make, and as I might well do, that there was not, nor ever had been. I told her that Mr. Robert had rattled and jested, as she knew it was his way, and that I took it as always, as I supposed he'd meant it, to be a wild, airy way of discourse that had no significations to it, and assured her that there was not the least title of what she'd understood by it between us, and that those who had suggested it had done me a great deal of wrong, and Mr. Robert no service at all. The old lady was fully satisfied, and kissed me, spoken cheerfully to me, and bid me take care of my health, and want for nothing, and so took her leave. But when she came down, she found the brother and all his sisters together by the ear. They were angry even to passion at his upbraiding of them with their being homely, and having never had any sweethearts, never having been asked the question, their being so forward as almost to ask first, and the like. He rallied them with Mrs. Betty, how pretty, how good-humored, how she sung better than they did, and danced better, and how much handsomer she was, and in doing this, he omitted no ill-natured thing that could vex them. The old lady came down in the height of it, and to stop it, told them the discourse she had with me, and how I'd answer that there was nothing between Mr. Robert and I. She's wrong there, says Robin. For if there was not a great deal between us, why should we be closer together than we are? I told her I loved her hugely, says he, but I could never make the jade believe I was in earnest. I do not know how you should, says his mother. Nobody in their good senses believed you were in earnest, to talk so to the poor girl, whose circumstances you know so well. I'm going to take a sip. But prithee, son, adds she, since you tell us you could not make her believe you were in earnest, what must you believe about it? For you ramble so in your discourse that nobody knows whether you are in earnest or in jest. But as I find the girl, by your own confession, has answered truly, I wish you would do so too. Tell me seriously, so that I may depend upon it. Is there anything in it or no? Are you in earnest or no? Are you distracted indeed, or are you not? 'Tis a weighty question. I wish you would make us easy about it. By my faith, madam, says Robin, 'tis in vain to mince the matter, or tell any more lies about it. I am in earnest as much as a man is that is going to be hanged. If Miss Betty would say she's loved me, and that she would marry me, I'd have her tomorrow morning fasting, and say to have and to hold instead of eating my breakfast. Well, says the mother, then there's one son lost, and she said it in a very mournful tone, as one greatly concerned at it. I hope not, madam, says Robin. No man is lost when a good woman has found him. Why, but child, says the old woman, she is a beggar. Why then, madam, she has the more need of a charity, says Robin. I'll take her off the hands of the parish, and she and I'll beg together. It's bad jesting with some things, says the mother. I don't jest, madam, says Robin. Well, come and beg your pardon, madam, and your blessing, madam, and my father's. This is all out of the way. Son, says the mother, if you are in earnest, you are undone, and I am afraid not, says he, for if I am really afraid, she won't have me, After all my sister's huffing, I believe I shall never be able to persuade her to it. That's a fine tale indeed. She is not so far gone neither. Mrs. Betty is no fool, says the youngest sister. Do you think she has learned to say no any more than any other people? No, Mrs. Mirthwith, says Robin. Mrs. Betty's no fool, but Mrs. Betty may be engaged some other way. And what then? Nay, says the elder sister. We can say nothing to that. Who must it be that to then? She is never out of doors. It must be between you. I have nothing to say to that, says Robin. I have been examined enough. That's my brother. If it must be between us, go to work with him. This stung the elder brother to the quick, and he concluded that Robin had discovered something. However, he kept himself from appearing disturbed. Prithee, says he, don't go to shame your stories off upon me. I tell you I deal in no such ware. I have nothing to say to no Miss Betty in the parish. And with that he rose up and brushed off. No, says the eldest sister, I dare answer for my brother. He knows the world better. Thus the discourse ended, but it left the eldest brother quite confounded. He concluded his brother had made a full discovery, and he began to doubt whether I had been concerned in it or not. But with all his management, he could not bring it about to get at me. At last he was so perplexed that he was quite desperate, and resolved he would see me whenever he came to of it. In order to this, he contrived it so that one day after dinner, watching his eldest sister till he could see her go upstairs, he ran after her. Hark ye, sister, says he, where is the sick woman? May not a body see her? Yes, says the sister, I believe you may, but let me go in first a little, and I'll tell you. So she run up the door and gave me notice, and presently called to him again. Brother, says she, you may come in if you please. So in he came, just in the same kind of a rant. Well, says he at the door, as he came in, where's the sick body that's in love? How do you do, Mrs. Betty? I would have got up out of my chair, but was so weak I could not for a good while, and he saw it, and his sister too, and she said, come, do not strive to stand up. My brother desires no ceremony, especially now that you are so weak. No, no, Mrs. Betty, pray sit still, says he, and so sits himself down in a chair over against me, and appeared as if he was mighty merry. He talked a deal of rambling stuff to his sister and to me, sometimes of one thing, sometimes another, on purpose to amuse her, and every now and then would turn it upon the old story. Poor Miss Betty, he'd say, it is a sad thing to be in love. Why, it has reduced you sadly. At last I spoke a little. I am glad to see you merry, sir, says I, but I think the doctor might have found something better to do than to make his game of his patients. If I had been ill for no other distemper, I know the proverb too well to have let him come to me. What proverb, says he, what? Where love is in the case, the doctor's an ass. Is that not it, Mrs. Betty? I smiled and said nothing. Nay, says he, I think the effects has proved it is to be love, and for it seems the doctor has done you little service. You mend very slowly, they say. I doubt there's somewhat in it, Mrs. Betty. I doubt you are sick of the incurables. I smiled and said, no, indeed, sir. That's none of my distemper. We had a deal of such discourse, and sometimes others that signified as little. By and by he asked me to sing them a song, at which I smiled and sang my singing days were over. At last he asked me if he should play upon his flute to me. His sister said she believed my head could not bear it. I bowed and said, pray, madam, do not hinder it. I love the flute very much. Then his sister said, well, do then, brother. With that he pulled out the key of his closet. "Dear sister," says he, "I am very lazy. Do step and fetch my flute. It lies in such a drawer," and naming a place where he was sure it was not, that she must be a little while looking for it. As soon as she was gone, he related the whole story to me of the discourse his brother had about me, and his concern about it, which was the reason for his contriving to visit. I assured him I had never opened my mouth either to his brother or to anyone else. I told him the dreadful existence I was in, that my love to him and his offerings to me to have me forget this affection and remove it to another had thrown me down, and that I had 1,000 times wished I might die rather than recover, and to have the same circumstances to struggle with as I'd had before. I added that I foresaw that as soon as I was well, I must quit the family, and that as for marrying his brother, I abhorred the thoughts of it after what had been my case with him, and that he might depend upon it I would never see his brother again upon that subject, that if he would break all of his vows and oaths and engagements with me, be that between his conscience and himself, but he should never be able to say that I, who he had persuaded to call myself his wife, and who had given him the liberty to use me as a wife, was not as faithful to him as a wife ought to be, whatever he might be to me. I say ASMR. He was going to reply and had said that he was sorry I could not be persuaded, and was going to say more, but he heard his sister a-coming, and so did I, and yet I forced out these few words as a reply, that I could never be persuaded to love one brother and marry the other. He shook his head and said, "Then I am ruined," meaning himself. And that moment his sister entered the room and told him she could not find the flute. "Well," says he merrily, "this laziness won't do." So he gets up and goes himself to look for it, but comes back without it too. Not but that he could have found it, but he had no mind to play, and besides, the errand he sent his sister on was answered another way. For he only wanted to speak to me, which he had done, though not much to his satisfaction. I had, however, a great deal of satisfaction in having spoken my mind to him in freedom, and with such an honest plainness as I have related, and though it did not all work the way I desired, that is to say, to oblige the person to me the more, yet it took from him all possibility of quitting me, but by the downright breach of honor, and giving up all of the faith of a gentleman, which he had made so often engaged by, never to abandon me, but to make me his wife. Sorry. But to make me his wife as soon as he came to his estate. It was not many weeks after this before I was about the house again, and began to grow well, but I continued melancholy and retired, which amazed the whole family, except he that knew the reason of it. Yet it was a great while before he took any notice of it, and I, as backward to speak as he, carried as respectfully to him, but never offered to speak a word that was particularly of any kind whatsoever, and this continued for 16 or 17 weeks, so that, as I expected every detail to be dismissed, the family, on account of which distaste they had taken another way in which I had no guilt, I expected to hear no more of this gentleman after all his solemn vows, but to be ruined and abandoned. At last I broke the way myself in the family for my removal. for being talking seriously with the old woman one day about my circumstances and how my distemper had left a heaviness upon my spirits. The old lady said, I am afraid, Betty, what I have said to you about my son has had some influence upon you, and that you are melancholy on his account. Pray, will you let me know how the matter stands with you both, if it may be improper? For as for Robin, he does nothing but rally and banter when I speak of it to him. Why, truly, madam, said I, the matter stands as I wish it did not, and I shall be very sincere with you in it. Whatever befalls me, Mr. Robert has several times proposed marriage to me, which is what I had no reason to expect, my poor circumstances considered, but I have always resisted him, and that perhaps in terms more positive than became me, considering the regard that I ought to have for every branch of your family. But, said I, madam, I could never so far forget my obligations to you and all your house, to offer to consent to a thing which I knew you must needs to disobliging to you, and have positively told him that I would never entertain a thought of that kind, unless I had your consent and his father's also, to whom I was bound by so many invisible obligations. And is this possible, Mrs. Betty? Said the old lady. Then you have been much juster to us than we have been to you, for we have all looked upon you as a kind of a snare to my son, and I had a proposal to make you for your removal for fear of it. But I had not yet mentioned it to you, because I was afraid of grieving you too much, lest it should throw you down again. For we have a respect for you still, though not so much as to have it be the ruin of my son. But if it is to be as you say, we have all wronged you very much. As to the truth of what I say, madam, just say I refer to your son himself. If he will do me any justice, I must tell you the story just as I have told it. Away goes the old lady to her daughters and tells them the whole story just as I had told it to her, and they were surprised at it, you may be sure, as I believed they would be. One said she could never have thought it, another said Robin was a fool, a third said she would not have believed a word of it, and said would warrant that Robin would tell the story another way. But the old lady, who was resolved to go on to the bottom of it, before I could have the least opportunity of acquainting her son with what he'd passed, and resolved to, that she would talk with her son immediately, and to that purpose sent for him, for he was gone to the lawyer's house in the town. Upon her sending, he returned immediately. Upon his coming up to them, they were all together. Sit down, Robin, said the old lady. I must have some talk with you, with all my heart, madam, says Robin, looking very merry. I hope it is about a good wife, for I am at a great loss in that affair. How can that be, says his mother. Did you not say you resolved to have Mrs. Betty? Ay, madam, says Robin, but there is one that has forbid the banns. Forbid the banns? Who can that be? Even Miss Betty herself, says Robin. How so, says his mother. Have you asked her the question, then? Yes, indeed, madam, says Robin. I have attacked her in the forum 5 times since she was sick, and am beaten off. The jade is so stout she won't capitulate nor yield upon any terms, except such as I cannot effectively grant. Explain yourself, says the mother, for I am surprised. I do not understand you. I hope you are not in earnest. Why, madam, says he, the case is plain enough upon me. It explains itself. She won't have me, she says. Is not that plain enough? I think 'tis plain and pretty rough too. Well, but, says the mother, you talk of conditions that you cannot grant. What does she want as a settlement? Her jointure ought to be according to her portion. What does she bring? Nay, As to fortune, says Robin, she is rich enough. I am satisfied in that point. But 'tis I that I am not able to come up to her terms, and she is positive she will not have me without. Here the sisters put in. Madam, says the second sister, 'tis impossible to be serious with him. He will never give a direct answer to anything. You had better just let him alone, and talk no more of it. You know how to dispose of her out of his way. Robin has a little warmed with his sister's rudeness, but he was even with her presently. There are two sorts of people, madam, says he, turning to his mother, that there is no commenting with.
Sippy, sippy.
Okay, I'll hydrate. There are two sorts of people, madam, he says, turning to his mother, that there is no contending with. That is, a wise body and a fool. 'Tis a little hard I should engage with both of them together. The younger sister then put in, We must be fools indeed, says she, in my brother's opinion, that he should make us believe he has seriously asked Mrs. Betty to marry him, and she has refused him. Answer and answer not, says Solomon, replied her brother, when your brother had said that he'd asked her no less than 5 times, and that she positively denied him. Methinks a younger sister need not question the truth of it, when her mother did not. My mother, you see, did not understand it, says the second sister. There's some differences, says Robin, between desiring me to explain it and telling me she did not believe it. Well, but son, says the old lady, if you are disposed to let us into the mystery of it, what were these hard conditions? Yes, madam, says Robin. I had done it before now. If the teasers here had not worried me by the way of interruption, the conditions are that I bring my father and you to consent to it. And without that, she protests she will never see me more upon that head. And the conditions, as I said, I suppose I shall never be able to grant. I hope my warm sisters will be answered now, and blushed a little. This answer was surprising to them all, though less to the mother, because of what I had said to her. As to the daughters, they stood mute a great while, but the mother said with some passion, Well, I heard this before, but I could not believe it. But if it is so, then we have all done Betty wrong, and she behaved better than I expected. Nay, says the eldest sister, if it is so, she has acted handsomely indeed. I confess, says the mother, it was none of her fault if he was enough fool to take a fancy to her. But to give such an answer to him shews more respect for us than I can tell you how to express. I shall value the girl the better for it, as long as I know her, but I shall not, says Robin, unless you give me your consent. I'll consider of that a while, says the mother. I assure you, if there were not some other objections, this conduct of hers would go a great way to bring me to consent. I wish it would go quite through with you, says Robin. If you had as much thought about making me easy as you have about making me rich, you would soon consent to it. Why, Robin, says the mother again, are you really in earnest? Would you fain have her? Really, madam, says Robin, I think 'tis hard you should question me again upon that head. I won't say that I will have her. How can I resolve that point, when you see I cannot have her without your consent? But this I will say, I am in earnest that I will never have anybody else if I can't have her. Betty or nobody is the word, and the question which of the two shall be is in your breast to decide, madam, provided only that my good-humored sisters here may have no vote in it. All this was dreadful to me, as the mother began to yield, and Robin pressed her home on it. On the other hand, she advised with the eldest son, and he used all the arguments in the world to persuade her to consent. Allegedly, his brother's passionate love for me and my generous regards to the family, and refusing my own advantages upon such a nice point of honor, and 1,000 such things, and as to go farther, he was a man in a hurry of public affairs and getting money, seldom at home throughout the main chance, but left all those things to his wife. You may easily believe that when the plot was thus, as they thought, broke out, it was not so difficult or so dangerous for the elder brother, who no one body suspected of anything, to have a freer access than before. Nay, the mother, which was just as he wished, proposed it to him to talk with Mrs. Betty. It may be, son, said she, you may see farther into the thing than I, and see if she has been so positive as Robin says she has been, or no. This was as well as he could wish, and he, as it were, yielding to talk with me to his mother's request, she brought me to him into her own chamber, told me her son had some business with me at her request, and then she left us together, and he shut the door after her. He came back to me and took me in his arms and kissed me very tenderly, but told me it was now come to that crisis that I should make myself happy or miserable as long as I lived, that if I could not comply to his desire, we should both be ruined. Then he told me the whole story between Robin, as he'd called him, and his mother and his sisters and himself, as above. And now, dear child, say he, consider what it will be to marry a gentleman of a good family in good circumstances, and with the consent of the whole house, and to enjoy all that the world can give you, and what, on the other hand, it would be to be sunk into the dark circumstances of a woman that has lost her reputation, and that though I shall be a private friend to you while I live, yet as I shall be suspected always, so you will be afraid to see me, and I shall be afraid to own you. He gave me no time to reply, but went on with me thus. What has happened between us, child, so long as we both agreed to do so, may be buried and forgotten. I shall always be your sincere friend, without any inclination to nearer intimacy. When you become my sister, and we shall have all the honest parts of conversation, without any reproachableness between us of having done amiss. I beg you to consider it, and do not stand in the way of your own safety and prosperity. And to satisfy you that I am sincere, added he, I'm here to offer you 500 pounds to make you some amends for the freedoms I have taken with you, which we shall look upon as some of the follies of our lives, which 'tis hoped we may repent of. He spoke thus in such much more moving terms than it was possible for me to express, that you may suppose, as he held me above an hour and a half in the discourse, so he answered all my objections and fortified his discourse with all of the arguments the human wit and art could devise. I cannot say, however, that anything he said made impressions enough upon me, so as to give me any thought of the matter, till he told me at very last plainly that if I refused, he was sorry to add that he could never go on with me in that station as we stood before, that though he'd loved me as well as ever, and that I was as agreeable to him, yet the sense of virtue has not so forsaken him as to suffer him to lie with a woman that his brother courted to make his wife. That if he took his leave of me with a denial from me in this affair, whatever he might do for me in that point of support grounded on his first engagement of maintaining me, yet he would not have me be surprised that he was obliged to tell me he could not allow himself to see me any more, and that indeed I could not expect it of him. I received this last part with sudden token of surprise and disorder, and had much ado to avoid sinking down, for indeed I loved him to an extravagance not easy to imagine, but he perceived my disorder, and entreated me to consider seriously of it, assured me that it was the only way to preserve our mutual affection, that in this station we might love as friends with the utmost passion, and with a love of relation untainted, free from our own just reproaches, and free from other people's suspicions, that he should ever acknowledge his happiness owning to me, that he would be a debtor to me as long as he lived, and would be paying that debt as long as he had breath. Thus he brought me up, in short, to a kind of hesitation in the matter, having the dangers on one side represented in lively figures, and indeed heightened by my own imagination of being turned out to the wide world a mere cast-off horror, for it was no less, and perhaps exposed as such, with little to provide for myself, with no friend, no acquaintance in the whole wides of the worlds out of the town, and there I could not pretend to stay. All this terrified me to the last degree, and he took care upon all occasions to lay it home to me that the worst colors, on the other hand, he'd failed not to set forth the easy prosperous life which I was going to live. He answered all that I could object from affection and from former engagements, without telling me the necessity that was before us of taking other measures now. And as to his promises of marriage, the natures of things, he said, had put an end to that by the probability of my being his brother's wife before the time to which he promises all referred. Thus, in a word, I may say, he reasoned me out of my reason, he conquered all my arguments, and I began to see a danger that I was in which I had not considered of before, and that was of being dropped by both of them, and left alone in the world to shift of my own self. This, and his persuasion at length prevailed with me to consent, though with so much reluctance that it was easy to see I should go to church like a bear to the stake. I had some little apprehensions about me too late, lest my new spouse, who, by the way, I had not the least affection for, should be skillful enough to challenge me on another account upon our first coming to bed together. But whether he did it with design or not, I knew not, but his elder brother took care to make him very much bundled before he went to bed, so that I had the satisfaction of a drunken bedfellow for the first night. How he did it I know not, but I concluded that he certainly contrived it, that his brother might be able to make no judgment of the difference between a maid and a married woman, nor did he ever entertain any notions of it, or disturbed his thoughts about it. I should go back a little here to where I left off. The elder brother having thus managed me, his next business was to manage his mother, and he never left till he had brought her to acquiescence, and be passive even without acquainting the father, other than by post letters, so that she consented to our marrying privately, leaving her to manage the father afterwards. Then he cajoled with his brother, and persuaded him what service he had done him, and how he had brought his mother to consent, which, though true, was not indeed done to serve him, but to serve himself, and thus diligently did he cheat him, and had the thanks of a faithful friend for shifting off his whore onto his brother's arms for a wife. So naturally do men give up honor and justice and even Christianity to secure themselves. I must now come back to Brother Robin, as we always called him, who, having got his mother's consent, as above, came big with the news to me and told me the whole story of it, and with a sincerity so visible that I must confess it grieved me that I must be the instrument to abuse so honest a gentleman, but that there was no remedy. He would have me, and I was not obliged to tell him that I was his brother's whore, though I had no other way to put him off, so I came gradually onto it and be told we were married. Modesty forbids me to reveal the secrets of the marriage bed, but nothing could have happened more suitable to my circumstances than that. As above, my husband was so fuddled with it when he came to bed that night that he could not remember in the morning whether he had had any conversations with me or no, and I was obliged to tell him he had, though in reality he had not, that I might be sure he could not make no inquiry about anything else. It concerns the story in hand very little to enter into the farther particulars of the family, or of myself, for the 5 years that I lived with this husband, only to observe that I had 2 children by him, and that at the end of the 5 years he died. He had been really a very good husband to me, and we lived very agreeably together, but as he had not received much from them, and had in the little time we lived acquired no great matters, so my circumstances were not great, nor was I much mended by the match. Indeed, I was preserved the elder brother's bonds to me to pay me £500, which he offered me for my consent to marry his brother, and this, with what I had saved of the money he formerly gave me, and about as much more by my husband, left me with a widow, with about £12,000 in my pocket. My 2 children were indeed taken happily off my hands by my husband's father and mother, and that was all they got by Miss Betty. I confess I was not suitably affected with the loss of my husband, nor can I say that I ever loved him as I ought to have done, and was suitable to the good usage I had from him, for he was a tender, kind, good-humored man, as any woman could desire, but his brother being so... Oh, I lost my spot. But his brother being so always in my sight, at least while we were in the country, was a continual snare to me, and I was never in bed with my husband, but I wished myself in the arms of his brother, and though his brother never offered me the least kindness that way after our marriage, but carried it just as a brother ought to do, yet it was impossible for me to do so to him. In short, I committed adultery and incest with him every day in my desires, which, without a doubt, was as effectually a criminal offense. Before my husband died, his elder brother was married, and we being then removed to London, were written to by the old lady to come and be at the wedding. My husband went, but I pretended indisposition, so I stayed behind, for in short, I could not bear the sight of him being given to another woman, though I knew I was never to have him myself. I was now, as above, left loose to the world, and being still young and handsome, as everybody said of me, and I assure you I thought myself so, and with a tolerable fortune in my pocket, I put no small value upon myself. I was courted by several very considerable tradesmen, and particularly very warmly by one, a linen draper, at whose house, after my husband's death, I took a lodging. His sister being my acquaintance, here I had all the liberty and opportunities to be gay, and appeared in company that I could desire. My landlord's sister being one of the maddest, gayest things alive, and not so much mistress of her virtue as I thought at first she had been, she brought me into a world of wild company, and even brought home several persons, such as she liked well enough to gratify, to see her pretty widow. Now, as fame and fools make an assembly, I was here wonderfully caressed, had an abundance of admirers, and such as called themselves lovers, but I found not one fair proposal among them all. As for their common design, that I understood too well to be drawn into any more snares of that kind. I need a drink. Sorry. The case was altered with me. I had money in my pocket and had nothing to say to them. I had been tricked once by the cheat called love, but the game was over. I was resolved now to be married or nothing, and to be well married or not at all. I loved the company indeed of men of mirth and wit, and was often entertained with such, as I was also with others, but I found by just observation that the brightest men came upon the dullest errands, that is to say, the dullest as to what I aimed at. On the other hand, those who came with the best proposals were the dullest and most disagreeable part of the world. I was not averse to a tradesman, but then I would have a tradesman, forsooth, that was something of a gentleman too, that when my husband had a mind to carry me to the court or to the play, he might become a sword and look as a gentleman as another man, and not like one that had the mark of his apron strings upon his coat, or the mark of his hat upon his periwig, that should look as if he was set on to his sword with his sword was put on to him, and that carried his trade into his countenance. Well, at last I found this amphibious creature, this land-water thing I'd called a gentle tradesman. And just as plague upon me, folly I was catching in, the very snare which, as I might say, I laid for myself. I think I'm going to read 2 more pages, and then I'm probably going to need to call it. My eyes are starting to feel a little bit of the strain, so it's probably not going to be as... Apparently I found you. An amphibious creature, this land water thing called a gentle tradesman. I'm also just excited for tomorrow's stream, so I'm trying to go easy on today's. This was a draper, too, for though my comrade would have bargained for me for her brother, yet when they came to the point, it was, it seemed, for a mistress, and I kept true that this notion, that a woman should never be kept for a mistress that had money to make herself a wife. Thus my pride, not my principle, my money, not my virtue, kept me honest, though as it proved, I found I had much better have been sold by my she-comrade to her brother than to have been sold myself as I did to a tradesman that was rake, gentleman, shopkeeper, and beggar altogether. But I was hurried on by my fancy to a gentleman to ruin myself in the grossest manner that ever woman did, for my new husband, coming to a lump of money at once, fell into such a profusion of expense that all I had and all he had would not have held it out for over 1 year. He was very fond of me for about 1/4 of a year, and when I got that, and what I got by that was I had the pleasure of seeing a great deal of my money spent upon myself. "Come, my dear," he says to me one day, "shall we go and take a turn into the country for a week?" "Aye, my dear," says I. "Whither would you go?" "I care not whither," says he, "but I have a mind to look quality for a week." "We'll go to Oxford," says he. "How," says I, "shall we go?" I am no horsewoman, and 'tis too far for a coach. Too far, says he. No place is too far for a coach and 6. If I carry you out, you shall travel like a duchess. Says I, my friend, 'tis a frolic. But if you have a mind to it, I don't care. Well, the time was appointed, and we had a rich coach with very good horses, a coachman, postilion, and 2 footmen in a very good liveries, a gentleman on horseback, and a page in a feather in his hat, upon another horse. The servants all called him my lord, and I was her honour, the countess, and thus we travelled to Oxford. And a pleasant journey we had, for, give him his due, not a beggar alive knew better how to be a lord than my husband. We saw all the rarities at Oxford, talked with 2 or 3 fellows of colleagues about putting a nephew that was left in his lordship's care to the university, and there beginning his tutorage. We diverted ourselves with bantering several other poor scholars, with the hopes of being at least his lordship's chaplain, and putting on a scarf, and thus having lived like quality indeed as to the expense. We went away for Northampton, and in those about 12 days rambling, came home again to the tune of about £93 expense. Vanity is the perfection of a fop. My husband had the excellence that he valued nothing of expense. As his history, you may be sure, was very little weight to it, 'tis enough to tell you that in about 2 years and a quarter he broke, got into a sponging house, was arrested in an action too heavy for him to give bail to, so he sent for me to come to him. It was no surprise to me, for I had foreseen something before that all was going to wreck, and had been taking care to reserve something, if I could, for myself. But when he sent for me, he behaved much better than I expected. He told me plainly he had played the fool, and suffered himself to be surprised, which he might have prevented, that now he foresaw me he could not stand it, and therefore he would have me go home, and in the night take away everything I had in the house of any value, and secure it. And after that he told me that if I could get away £100 or £200 in goods out of the shop, I should do it. Only, says he, let me know nothing of it, neither what you take or whether you carry it, for as for me, he says, I am resolved to get out of this house and be gone, and if you never hear of me more, my dear, says he, I wish you well. I am only sorry for the injury I have done to you. He said some very handsome things to me indeed at parting, for I told you he was a gentleman, and that was all the benefit I had of his being so, that he had used me very handsomely even to his last, only spent all I had and left me to rob the creditors for something to subside on. However, I did as he bade me, that you may be sure, and having thus taken my leave of him, I never saw him more, for he found means to break out of the bailiff's house that night or the next. How, I know not, for I could come at no knowledge of anything more than this, that he came home about 3 o'clock in the morning, 'cause the rest of his goods to be removed to the mint, and the shop to be shut up, and having raised what money he could, he got over to France, from whence I have 1 or 2 letters from him, but no more. I did not see him when he came home, for he, having given me such instructions as above, and having made the best of my time, I had no more business back again at the house, not knowing but I might have been stopped there by the creditors for a commission of bankrupt. Being soon after issued, they might have stopped me by orders from the commissioner, but my husband having desperately got out of the bailiffs by letting himself down from almost the top of the house to the top of another building, and leaping from thence, which was almost 2 stories, and which was enough indeed to have broken his neck, he came home and got away with his goods before the creditors could come to seize. That is to say, before they could get out the commission and be ready to send their officers to take And I think that is where I am going to leave it for now. Thank you for the lurk glitch. I'm probably sending it here now anyways, though. I hope that everybody enjoyed this little bit of the reading. We got to page 52, so I made it another 20 pages or so, which is not bad considering that this is definitely written in Old English. As you can probably tell by some of my stumblings. Ice ASMR. Right as the music stops. But yeah, I hope everybody enjoyed. I am super excited about tomorrow, and just so you're aware, I will be streaming The Forest with the lovely frog and the bag of bones. Two of my favoritist non-human humans on the planet. At least for streaming purposes. I look forward to seeing everybody, and for those of them who haven't gotten a chance to see my new model, I am excited to have everybody see her tomorrow. So, I hope you all enjoyed this reading of the book Moll Flanders by Daniel Defoe. And if anybody comes up with some books that we can read after this one is done, please feel free to get onto my Blue Sky and let me know what you would like to delve into next. Surprisingly enough, we're already close to a quarter of the way through this book. So yeah. Oh, that reminds me. Thank you, Biddy. You also have a thing. Oh, wait, is it? Let me.
Big sister, I'm completely starving.
There we go. I didn't realize that you were here. Otherwise, I would have done that much sooner. So now, anytime you are here, you can type that exclamation Biddy Bears into chat, and it will ping up that you are here. I found it. I saw it. It seemed perfect. But until next week for the reading, I hope everybody enjoys. Feel free to watch back vlogs. Bods. And I will see everybody tomorrow for some more of The Forest. Bye-bye!